in the Harper's room with Sibel, right? And Sibel just left to go talk to Natan. Okay. She looked at the music they'd been playing, and Sibel's words echoed through her mind. He has the discipline, you have the originality. Everyone's been humming it. People liking her twiddles? That still didn't seem possible, although Sibel had no more reason to lie to her than the Master Harper when he'd said that her music was valuable to him, to the Harpercraft. Incredible. She struck a chord on the guitar, a triumphant, incredible chord, and then modulated it, thinking how undisciplined that musical reaction had been. They were still twiddles, her songs, unlike the beautiful, intricate musical designs that Domik composed. But if she studied hard with him, maybe she could improve her twiddles into what she could honestly call music. Firmly, she tuned her thoughts toward the guitar duet and ran through the tricky passages, slowly at first, and then finally at time. One of the chords modulated into tones that were so close to the agonized cry of the previous night that she repeated the phrase, "Don't leave me alone," and then found another chord that fit, the cry in the night, of anguish heart-striking, of soul-killing fright. That's what Sibel had said, that Brecky would not want to live if Canthan Fnor died. Live for my living, or else I must die. Don't leave me alone. A world heard that cry. By the time Manoli had arranged the chords in the plaint to her satisfaction, Beauty, Rocky, and Diver were softly crooning along with her, so she worked on the verse. "Well, you approve?" she asked her fair. "Perhaps I ought to jot it down on something." "No need," said a quiet voice behind her, and she whirled on the stool to see Sibel seated at the sand table, scribbling quickly. "I think I've got most of it." He looked up, saw the startled expression on her face, and gave her a brief smile. "Close your mouth and come check my notation." But, what did I tell you, Manoli, about apologizing for the wrong things? I was just tuning. Oh, the song needs polishing, but that refrain is poignant enough to set a hold to tears. He beckoned again to her, a crisp gesture that brought her to his side. "You might want to change the sequence. Give the peril first, the solution next. Though I don't know, with that melody, do you always use minors?" He slid a glass across the sand so that the scribbling couldn't be erased. "We'll see what the Harper thinks." "Now what's wrong?" "Leave it. You can't be serious." "I can be, and usually am, young Manoli," he said, rising from the stool to reach for his guitar. "Now, let's see if I put it down correctly." Manoli sat, immersed in acute embarrassment to hear Sibel playing a tune of her making. But she had to listen. When her fire lizards began to croon softly along with Sibel's deft playing, she was about ready to concede, privately, that it wasn't a bad tune after all. "That's very well done, Sibel. Didn't know you had it in you," said the Master Harper, applauding vigorously from the doorway. "I'd rather dreaded transferring that incident to music." "This song, Master Robinson, is Manoli's." Sibel had risen at the Harper's entrance, and now he bowed deferentially to Manoli. "Come, girl, it's why the Harpers searched a continent for you." "Manoli, my dear child, no blushes for that song." Robinson seized her hands and clasped them warmly. "Think of the chore you just saved me. I came in halfway through the verse, Sibel, if you would, please." And the Harper gestured Sibel to begin again. With one long arm, Robinson snaked a stool out from under the flat-bottomed sand table, and still holding Manoli by the hand, he composed himself to listen as Sibel's clever fingers plucked the haunting phrase from the augmenting chords. "Now, Manoli, think only of the music as Sibel plays, not that it is your music. Learn to think objectively, not subjectively. Listen as a Harper." He held her hand so tightly in his that she could not pull away without giving offense. The clasp of his fingers was more than reassuring. It was therapeutic. Her embarrassment ebbed as the music and Sibel's warm baritone voice flowed into the room. When the fire lizards hummed loud, Robinson squeezed her hand and smiled down at her. "Yes, a little work on the phrases. One or two words could be altered, I think, to heighten the effect, but the whole can stand. Can you scribe—" "Ah, Sibel, well done, well done," said the Master Harper as Sibel tapped the protecting glass. "I'll want it transferred to some of those neat paper sheets Bendrick supplied us with, so Manoli can go over it at her leisure. Not too much leisure, and the Master Harper held up a warning hand, because that fire lizard echo swept round Pern, and we must explain it. A good song, Manoli. A very good song. Don't doubt yourself so fiercely. Your instinct for melodic line is very good. Very good indeed. Perhaps I should send more of my apprentices to sea hold for a time if this is the sort of talent the waves provoke. And see, your fair is still humming the line. Manoli drew out of her confusion long enough to realize that the fire lizard Tom had nothing to do with her song. Their attention was not on the humans, but... The eggs! They're hatching! 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 Both master and journeyman crowded each other to get through the door to the hearth and the fire-warming pots. Manoli, come here! I'm getting the meat. They're hatching! The Harper shouted. They're hatching! Grab that pot, Sibel, it's wobbling! As Manoli dashed into the room, the two men were kneeling at the hearth, watching anxiously as the earthen pots rocked slightly. They can't hatch in the pots, she said, with a certain amount of asperity in her voice. She took the pot from the protecting encirclement of Sibel's curved fingers and carefully upended it on the hearth, her fingers cushioning the egg until the sand spilled away from it. She turned to Robinson, but he had already followed her example. Both eggs lay in the light of the fire, rocking slightly, the striations of hatching marking the shells. The fire lizards lined up on the mantel and the hearth, humming deep in their throats. The pulsing sound seemed to punctuate the now violent movement of the eggs as the hatchlings fluttered against the shells for exit. Master Robinson, called Sylvina from the outer room. Master Robinson? Sylvina, they're hatching! The Harper's jubilant bellow startled Manoli and set the fire lizards to squawking and flapping their wings in surprise. Other Harpers, curious about the noise, began to crowd in behind Sylvina, who stood at the door of the Harpers' sleeping quarters. If there were too many people in the room, Manoli thought. No! Stay out! Keep them out! She cried before she realized she'd said anything. Yes, stay back now, Sylvina was saying. You can't all see. You've got the meat, Manoli? Ah, so you have. Is it enough? It should be. What do we do now? Asked the Harper, his voice rough with suppressed excitement as he crouched above the eggs. When the fire lizard emerges, feed it, Manoli said, somewhat surprised, for the Harper must have been a guest at numerous dragon hatchings. Just stuff its mouth with food. When will they hatch? Asked Sibel, washing his fingers and his palms with excited frustration. The fire lizard's hum was getting more intense, their eyes whirling with participation in the event. Suddenly, a second little golden queen erupted into the room, her eyes spinning. She let out a squeal, which Beauty answered, lifting her wings higher, but in greeting, not challenge. Sylvina! Manoli pointed to the queen. Master Robinson, look! Said the head woman, and as they all watched, the newly arrived queen took her place on the mantel beside Beauty, her throat vibrating as fast as the others. That's Murga, Lord Grohy's queen, said the Harper, and then he glanced over his shoulder at the door. I hope it isn't an awkward time for him. This sort of summons could be inconvenient. Above the fire lizard's vibrant sounds, they all heard the Harper's name bellowed. Someone go and escort Lord Grohy, ordered the Harper, his eyes never leaving the hearth and the two eggs. Robinson? It would seem that his order was unnecessary, for the bellower was rapidly approaching. Robert, what? They are? Do you know what? That Murga of mine's in another taking. Forced me to come here. Here now, what's all this? Where is Robinson? Manoli tore her eyes from the two eggs, though she was certain she saw a widening crack in the one on the left, to see the entrance of the fort Lord Holder. As his voice indicated, he was a big man, almost as tall as the Harper, but much broader in the torso, with thick thighs and bulging calves. He walked lightly for all his mass, although he's breathing heavily for having come to the hall at a fair pace. There you are. What's this all about? The eggs are about to hatch, Lord Grohy. Eggs? The brow of the Holder's florid face were contracting in a puzzled scowl. Oh, your eggs? They're hatching? And Murga's reacting? I trust not at any inconvenience to you, Lord Grohy. Well, not so's I wouldn't come when she insisted. How'd the creature know? Ask Manoli. Manoli? And suddenly Manoli found herself the object of his intense, frowning scrutiny. You're Manoli? The brows went up in surprise. Little bit of a thing, aren't you? Not at all what I expected. Don't blush. I don't bite. My fire lizard might. Wouldn't worry you, though, wouldn't it? These are all yours? Why, my queen's beside you, as friendly as can be, and not dangerous at all. Manoli! The harper's exclamation brought her attention back to the hearth. His egg had given a convulsive rock, all but spinning itself off the hearthstone. Gasping, he put out both hands to prevent its falling. The shell cracked wide open, and a little bronze fire lizard rolled into his hands, creeling with hunger, its body glistening. "Feed it! Feed it!" Manoli cried. Robinson, unable to take his eyes off the fire lizard, fumbled for the piled meat and shoved food into the fire lizard's open mouth. The little bronze, shaking its wings out for balance, snatched ferociously at the meat, gobbling so fast that Manoli held her breath for fear the creature would choke in its greed. "Not too much. Make it wait. Talk to it. Soothe it," Manoli urged. Just then the other egg split. "It's a queen!" shouted Sibel, rocking back on his heels in the excess of his surprise. Only Lord Grohy's quick hand on his back kept him from falling over. "Feed her!" the Lord Holder barked. "But I'm not to have the queen!" For one split second, Sibel started to turn and offer the queen to the harper. "Too late!" Manoli shouted, diving forward to intercept the gesture. She jammed meat on Sibel's seeking hand and then pushed it back to the frantically creeling queen. "You're supposed to have a fire lizard. It doesn't matter which." The harper was oblivious to the interchange. He was intent on his bronze, stroking it, feeding it, crooning to it. The little queen had gobbled Sibel's initial offering, her tail wrapped so firmly about his wrist that he could not have disentangled himself had he managed to sustain his moment of sacrifice. Manoli turned to assist the harper, but Lord Grohy was kneeling beside him, encouraging him. When the two hatchlings were bulging with food, Manoli removed the meat bowls. "They'll burst with another mouthful," she told the reproachful harpers. "Now, hold them against you. Stroke them. They should fall asleep. There now." As the men complied with her urgings, the new fire lizards, sated for the present, wearily closed their eyes, their little heads dropping to the protecting forearms. She'd forgotten what a scant handful a newly hatched fire lizard was. Her friends had grown so much since hatching. Lord Grohy's Murga was as tall in the shoulder as Beauty, but not so deep-chested. The two were now exchanging compliments, stroking heads and touching curved wings. "It's incredible," the harper said, his words no more than an articulated whisper, his eyes brilliant with joy. "It is absolutely the most incredible experience I have ever had." "Know what you mean," Lord Grohy replied in an embarrassed mumble, ducking his head, but Manoli could see that the burly holder's face was flushed. "Can't forget it myself." Carefully, Master Robinson rose from his knees, his eyes on the sleeping fire lizard, his free hand poised in case an incautious movement unsettled the little bronze. "It explains so very much that I could never have understood about dragon riders. Yes, it opens a whole new area of understanding." He sat down on the edge of his bed. "Now I can sense dimly what Brecky must have suffered. And I know why young Jackson must have Ruth." He smiled at Lord Grohy's grunt at that statement. "Yes, I have stood so long peering through a small opening into another hold of understanding. Now I can see without obstruction." His chin had dropped to his chest as he spoke in soft, reflective tones, more to himself than those close enough to catch the whispered words. He shook himself slightly and looked up, his smile again radiant. "What a gift you have made me, Manoli. What a magnificent gift." Beauty came to perch on Manoli's shoulder, her humming now diminished to a soft murmur of sound. Lord Grohy's queen, Murga, flew to his shoulder, wrapping her tail around his thick neck, just as Beauty did. "I don't know how it happened, Master Robinson," Sibel said, rising from the hearth with exaggerated care. His manner was both defensive and apologetic. "The pots were in the wrong order. I don't understand. You should have had the queen." "My dear Sibel, I couldn't care in the slightest. This bronze fellow is everything I could ever want. And frankly, I believe that it might be more advantageous for you to have the queen, going out and about the land as you'll have to do. Yes, I think chance has worked more for than against us. And I am quite content. Indeed I am, with my bronze man here. What a lovely, lovely creature." He had eased himself back against the bolster, the fire lizard snuggling in the crook of his arm, his other hand protectingly cradling the open side. Such a lovely big fellow. His head fell back, his eyes heavy, all but asleep himself. Now that's a real miracle, said Sylvina in a very soft voice. Asleep without wine or Fellis juice? Out, out. She shook her hands at those crowding the door, but her gesture to Lord Grohe to precede her from the room was a touch more courteous. The Lord Holder nodded agreement and made a great show of tiptoeing quietly across the room. His exit cleared the doorway of onlookers. Sylvina picked up the half-filled bowls by the fire and put one near the harper's hand. Manoli beckoned the rest of her fare, and they flitted out the window. Got them well trained, haven't you? Lord Grohe said once Sylvina had closed the door to the harper's chamber. Want to have a long chat with you about 'em. Robinson says they'll fetch and carry for you. Do you believe, as he does, that what one fire lizard knows, the others do too? Too disconcerted to reply, Manoli glanced frantically at Sylvina and saw her nod encouragingly. It would seem logical, Lord Grohe. It would certainly account for what happened the other night. In fact, there's no other way to account for that, is there? Unless you can speak to dragons. Unless you can speak to dragons? Lord Grohe laughed, ponderously, poking Manoli's shoulder with his finger in good humor. Speak to dragons. Manoli felt herself grinning because his laughter was a bit contagious, and she didn't know what else to do. She hadn't meant to be funny. Then Sylvina shushed them imperiously, pointing urgently at the harper's closed door. Sorry, Sylvina, Lord Grohe said contritely. Most amazing thing. Woke up out of a sound sleep, scared out of my wits. Never happened to me before, I can tell you. He nodded his head emphatically, and Murga chirped. Wasn't your fault, pet, he said, stroking her tiny head with a thick forefinger, only doing the same as the others. That's what I want you to teach me, girl. The forefinger now pointed at Manoli. You will, won't you? Robinson says you have yours trained to treat. It would be my privilege, sir. Well spoken. Lord Grohe turned his heavy torso in Sylvina's direction, favoring the head woman with a fierce stare. Well spoken, child. Not what I expected. Can't trust other people's opinions. Never did, never will. I'll arrange something with Robinson later. Not too much later, but later. Good day to you all. With that, the Lord Holder of Fort strode from the room, nodding and smiling to the harpers still gathered in the corridor. Manoli saw Sibel and Sylvina exchanging worried glances, and she moved across the room to stand before them. What did Lord Grohe mean, Sylvina? I'm not what he expected. I was afraid you'd catch that, Sylvina said, her eyes narrow with a contained anger. She patted Manoli's shoulder absently. There's been loose talk, which has done them no good and you no harm. I've a few knees to set knocking, so I have. Manoli was thoroughly and unexpectedly consumed with anger. Beauty chittered, her eyes beginning to whirl redly. Those cock girls stay up at the hold during threadfall, don't they? Sylvina gave Manoli a long, quelling look. I said I'll handle the matter, Manoli. You, and Sylvina pointed at her, will occupy yourself with harper business. She was clearly as furious as Manoli, and flicked imaginary dust from her skirt with unnecessary force. You're to stay here, both of you, and be sure nothing disturbs the harper. Nothing, you understand? She pinned apprentice and journeyman with a stern glare. He's asleep, and he's to stay asleep as long as that little creature lets him. That way he might get caught up on himself for a change before he's worn to death. She picked up the tray. I'll send your suppers up with Camo, and their suppers as well. She closed the door firmly behind her. Manoli looked at the closed door for a long moment, still feeling the anger in her guts. She'd not really done the girls any kind of harm, so why would they try to prejudice the Lord Holder against her? Or perhaps it was all Dunca's connivance. Manoli knew that the little cot holder hated her for the humiliation caused by the fire lizard. Now that Manoli was at the hall, why should Dunca persist? She glanced back at Sibel, who was regarding her even as he cradled his sleeping little queen. Leave it, Manoli, he said in a quiet but emphatic tone. He gestured to the sand table. Harper business is better business for you now. Master Robinson said you were to copy the song onto sheets. Moving carefully so as not to disturb his little queen, he got supplies from the shelves and put them on the center board. So copy. I don't understand what they thought they'd accomplish, prejudicing Lord Grohe against me. What would he do? Sibel said nothing as he hooked a stool under him and sat down. He pointed at the music. It's only right for me to know. The insult is mine to settle. Sit down, Manoli, and copy. That's far more important to the harper and the hall than any petty machinations of envious girls. They could do me mischief, couldn't they? If they got Lord Grohe to believe what they said. I never heard those girls. True enough, but that is not harper business. The song is. Copy it. And one more word from you on any other subject, and I'll... If you're not quiet, you'll wake your fire lizard, Manoli said. But she sat down at the table and started copying. She could recognize obstinacy when she saw it, and it would do her no good to set Sibel against her. What are you going to name her? She asked. Name her? Sibel was startled, and Manoli was dismayed to realize how much of his joy in his queen had been diminished by her silly concern over gossip. Why, I can have the privilege of naming her, can't I? She's mine. I think... And his eyes glowed with affection for the hatchling. I think I'll call her Kimi. That's a lovely name, replied Manoli, and then bent to her copying with a good heart.
I'm stealing that name so much.
Stealing that name so much?